I was sitting on the edge of my own sofa, hands clasped, staring at a woman I did not know. She was curled up in a pale blue silk dress, blonde hair fanned across the pillow, breathing slow and even. The apartment smelled like red wine and jasmine perfume. She had been too drunk to remember her address, so I brought her here. The only place I knew was safe. On the coffee table, her clutch sat half open, phone screen glowing. I was not trying to look, but the name was too bright to miss. Dad, Richard Whitfield, the CEO of the company I had joined 2 months ago. Let me back up. My name is Nathan Reeves. I am 34 years old, and I work as a structural engineer at Whitfield Development Group, one of the largest real estate firms in Chicago. I grew up outside Indianapolis, in a small town where everyone knew your parents before they knew you. My father was an electrician who came home every evening smelling like copper wire. My mother was a nurse. They raised me with a simple philosophy: show up, do the work, never make a scene. I carried that into everything I touched, including a marriage that quietly ended 2 years before this night. Her name was Rachel. We were together for 6 years, married for 4, no children, no blowouts, just 2 people sitting across from each other one evening and realizing without anger that they wanted completely different lives. She moved to Denver to be closer to her family. I stayed in Chicago alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park that was too quiet and slightly too large for one person. My routine after the divorce was simple and unchanging. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner for one, usually whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. I read before bed. I did not feel sorry for myself, but I was not exactly thriving either. I was existing inside a life that fit me the way a shirt fits after you have lost weight. Still wearable, but hanging loose in all the wrong places. Richard Whitfield ran his company the way a surgeon runs an operating room. Precise, exacting, and with zero tolerance for anyone who could not keep pace. He was famous in the industry for firing people mid-sentence if he caught a whiff of incompetence. I had been there 2 months and was still deep in my probation period, still proving every morning that I deserved the desk they gave me. The only person I was close to was Jordan, another structural engineer on my team who had been there 3 years. Jordan was loud where I was quiet. He had made it his mission to drag me out of the apartment at least once a week because, in his words, I was turning into furniture. That Friday, Jordan insisted we go to a rooftop bar in River North. I told him I was tired. He told me I was always tired, and that was exactly the problem, so I went. The bar was packed, music thumping through the floor, string lights swaying in the breeze off the lake. I nursed an IPA in a corner near the railing, already planning my exit. Then I saw her far end of the bar alone, blonde hair, tangled pale blue silk dress that seemed out of place in the casual crowd, holding what looked like her 4th or 5th cocktail. Her eyes were red. The bartender caught my eye and nodded in her direction. The universal signal for, "Is she with you?" I shook my head, but I walked over anyway. She looked up with glassy eyes. I didn't ask for a babysitter. I told her I was not applying. When she tried to stand, her heel caught the edge of the stool and she stumbled. I caught her elbow before she went down. I asked where she lived. She shook her head, words slurring together. Something about a high floor and a doorman, but no street, no building name, nothing I could type into a GPS. I stood in the parking lot under the streetlights with a drunk stranger who could not remember her own address. 2 choices: call an Uber to nowhere, or take her to the only safe place I had, my apartment 3 miles away. I chose the second option and immediately hated myself for it. Not because it was wrong, but because I knew exactly how it would look to anyone watching. I drove back to Lincoln Park in silence, her head against the passenger window, breath fogging the glass. I helped her up the stairs, guided her to the sofa, set a pillow under her head, draped a thin blanket over her shoulders, and placed a bottle of water and 2 Advil on the coffee table next to her clutch. That was when the phone screen lit up inside the half-open bag. Dad, Richard Whitfield. My stomach dropped through the floor. The woman I had just carried into my apartment at midnight was the daughter of the man who held my entire career in his hands, and she was asleep on my secondhand sofa. I stood in my own living room staring at that glowing name, and every rational thought I had told me this was the beginning of something very bad. I walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Before I lay down on the floor, I tore a page from a notebook and wrote 5 lines. "You're safe. This is my apartment. I'm in the bedroom, Nathan. I left the note on the coffee table next to the water and the Advil. Then I lay on the hardwood floor with a blanket pulled over me and stared at the ceiling until I fell asleep sometime around 3. I woke before she did. My back ached from the floor. I had slept in my own bedroom because offering her the bed seemed too intimate and reclaiming the sofa seemed cruel. So the floor was the only option left. I made coffee and a few minutes later heard the sofa creak in the other room, then slow footsteps, then silence, which meant she had found the note. She appeared in the kitchen doorway holding that torn piece of paper. Hair tangled, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, one strap of her dress slipping off her shoulder. She looked like someone trying to piece the last 12 hours together from scattered fragments. "Nathan," she said. I nodded. "You brought me to your apartment. I kept it simple." She could not remember her address. I had no other option that felt safe. I slept on the floor. Nothing happened. She was quiet for what felt like a full minute. Then she said something that caught me off guard. Most guys would have just left me at the bar. I shrugged. Most guys aren't me. It was not a boast. It was the way my father taught me truth works. Plain, without decoration. She called an Uber, gathered her clutch, and left without giving me her name or her number. I stood at the window and watched her disappear into the back seat. I figured that was the end of it. A strange night. A story I would never tell. Done. Monday morning. Jordan nudged me in the hallway outside the engineering bay. "Boss's daughter is in the office today," he said, nodding toward the glass corridor. I looked through the partition, and there she was. Claire Whitfield, blazer buttoned, hair pulled into a clean bun, posture straight as a ruler, heels clicking on polished concrete. She was an entirely different person from the woman on my sofa. Her eyes swept the room, passed over the drafting tables and the other engineers, and paused on me just for one beat. Then she turned and kept walking. She had recognized me, and I recognized the exact moment she chose not to show it. Over the next few weeks, Claire started appearing at the office more often. The official reason was that she was managing a marketing campaign for a new lakefront tower the company was developing. She had meetings, she had presentations, she had perfectly legitimate business reasons to be in the building 3 or 4 days a week, but I started noticing patterns that did not fit the official explanation. She found reasons to swing by the engineering floor. She asked me questions about load-bearing walls and foundation reinforcement and wind shear calculations. Questions that were specific enough to require sitting beside me at my desk. While I walked her through the answers, she brought coffee for the whole team one morning, but she only remembered that I took mine black, no sugar. She asked Jordan, never me directly, whether I usually stayed late at the office. She stood by the window one afternoon while I explained a set of structural blueprints to a junior colleague. And when I looked up mid-sentence, she was not watching the drawings. She was watching my hands moving across the paper. One afternoon after a meeting, I found her clutch sitting on the conference room table. Everyone else had filed out. I picked it up and walked it down the hall to her office. When I handed it to her, she took it with a small smile and said, "I keep losing this thing around you." Half joking, half not. I did not know what to do with that sentence. I nodded and walked back to my desk. I thought about it for the rest of the day and into the evening and again the next morning. The trust between us built through small things that nobody else would have noticed. I saw that the swivel chair at her desk in the marketing suite wobbled badly every time she shifted her weight. Nobody else cared. One evening, after she had gone home, I found a hex wrench in the supply closet, got on my knees, and tightened every bolt on the base until it sat perfectly level. The next morning, there was a yellow post. It stuck to my keyboard. "The chair works perfectly now. You fix things." I read it twice and slid it into my desk drawer. I did not understand yet that she meant something far beyond the chair, but I kept the note. One late evening, we were the only 2 people left in the building. The cleaning crew had already come and gone. The office was dim, lit only by desk lamps and the soft glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Claire was sitting on the edge of a desk in the conference room, shoes kicked off, bare feet on the carpet, cradling a cup of cold coffee, and she told me about Derek Lansing. Derek was the son of her father's most important business partner, and their relationship had been less romance than corporate merger. Their fathers played golf together every Saturday. Their families shared holidays. The relationship was expected, and for 2 years, Claire had played her part. But Derek was controlling, possessive, and jealous in the quiet, dangerous way that does not leave visible marks, but scars you from the inside. He tracked her location on her phone. He decided where they ate and who they socialized with. He treated her not as a partner, but as a possession. A line on a spreadsheet he managed. The night at the rooftop bar, she told me, was the night she had finally ended things with Derek for good. She had told Derek it was over that afternoon, and he had not taken it with any grace at all. She went to the bar alone that night because she did not know where else in the world to go. I wasn't just drunk that night, she said, staring at the floor. I was free for the first time in 2 years, and the first person I met was you. I did not know what to say to that. The weight of it settled into my chest and stayed. A few days later, Richard called me into his office. The meeting was about the lakefront project, technically, but before I made it to the door, he stopped me. I keep my work and my family separate, Reeves, he said, watching me over his reading glasses. I expect everyone else to do the same. It was not a question. It was not quite a threat, but it landed like a nail driven clean through wood, and the message was impossible to miss. I did not look toward the marketing wing for the rest of the week. Jordan noticed too. You and the boss's daughter have a lot of scenes together lately, he said over lunch one day. I told him it was nothing. Work overlap. He gave me the look of a man who has been lied to many times and has long stopped pretending to believe it. Sure, he said, work overlap. I changed the subject. But that night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the sofa where she had slept and asked myself what exactly I thought I was doing. One evening, walking to the parking garage after a late shift, Claire fell into step beside me. The corridor was empty. Our footsteps echoed. Why did you bring me to your apartment that night? She asked. You could have called a cab, dropped me at a hotel, anything. You asked me to take you somewhere safe. I said that was the only safe place I knew. She looked at me for a long time, longer than was comfortable, longer than you look at someone you think of as just a colleague. Then she said very quietly, I did not sleep well that night or the one after it. Then Derek came back. He walked into the Whitfield Group office on a Tuesday morning under the polished banner of a partnership meeting, tall and clean-shaven, wearing a suit that cost more than 2 months of my rent. He had that prep school confidence, the kind born from never hearing the word no, the kind that fills a room before the person even opens his mouth. He shook hands with everyone in sight. He smiled like a man who already owned the building and was simply being gracious about it. But the moment he saw Claire standing near my desk, reviewing a set of drawings I had printed for her, that smile vanished for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. Nobody else in the room caught it. I did. Derek had not come for business. He came to reclaim what he believed was still his, and the weapon he chose was not a lie. It was something far more dangerous. It was the truth, methodically stripped of every piece of context that made it decent. It started in Richard's office. I was at my desk, close enough to hear every word through the open door. Derek stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the relaxed posture of a man who had rehearsed his concern in front of a mirror that morning. Richard, he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to travel. Did you know some guy from your engineering team took your daughter to his apartment in the middle of the night? He let the words hang in the silence. He did not add details. He did not soften it. He did not need to. Those words arranged in exactly that order did all the damage by themselves. The context. A drunk woman who could not remember her address. The water on the table. The note that said she was safe. The man who slept on his own floor so a stranger could rest. All of it was surgically removed. What remained was the worst possible version of the story, and Derek knew precisely how powerful that version was. Richard looked up slowly from his desk. His expression did not change, but his jaw tightened. Derek let his gaze drift through the glass wall in my direction. I sat perfectly still, pen frozen over a set of structural calculations, my pulse hammering in my ears. Later that same day, Derek found me alone in the hallway near the break room. He had done his homework. He had somehow obtained security camera footage from my apartment building. 12 seconds of grainy video showing me guiding a stumbling Claire through my front front door at 12:15 in the morning. No audio, no context, no note on the coffee table, no bottle of water. Just a man and a visibly intoxicated woman disappearing into his apartment in the middle of the night. "A drunk girl in your apartment at midnight," Derek said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You know exactly how that looks, Reeves, and so will everyone else." The casualness was deliberate. The friendlier the tone, the harder the threat lands, because it makes the destruction sound like a reasonable observation rather than an attack. I did not respond. My jaw was locked tight enough to feel my nerves grinding together. My hands were curled at my sides, fingernails pressing half moons into my palms, but I said nothing because anything I said would become ammunition. Another sentence he could strip of its context and aim like a weapon. I had already watched him do it to the truth about that night. I was not going to hand him more material. Derek sent the hallway footage to Richard that afternoon. Within the hour, I was sitting across from the CEO in his corner office. Richard had the clip paused on his laptop, frozen on the exact frame where my hand was on Claire's waist, steadying her through the doorway. He was not angry exactly. He was something more complicated and worse. He was a father watching a piece of evidence that confirmed his deepest fear while trying with everything he had to hold his judgment long enough to hear the other side. "Explain," he said. One word. Then now I told him everything. She could not remember her address. I had no other option that felt safe. I put her on the sofa, set water and Advil on the table, wrote a note explaining where she was and where I was, and then slept on the floor of my own bedroom with the door closed. She left by Uber the following morning. Nothing happened. Nothing would ever have happened. I did not know who she was until her phone lit up with his name after she was already asleep on my couch. Richard sat with that for a long time, the kind of silence that stretches until you become aware of the ventilation humming in the ceiling and the traffic 12 floors below. Then he said, "I'll ask Claire." "You should," I said, but the damage was already done. The next morning, Richard reassigned me. I was moved to a renovation project on the south side, 40 minutes from the main office. A job that had nothing to do with the lakefront tower, nothing to do with marketing, and nothing to do with Claire. Jordan stopped by my new desk that afternoon. "You got exiled, man," he said quietly. I nodded. There was nothing else to say. The truth had been on my side the entire time, but Derek had ensured it arrived in Richard's office stripped of context, and a truth without context is not really the truth at all. It is just an accusation wearing a better suit. Claire found out what happened, and she did not accept it quietly. She walked into her father's office that same afternoon, and she closed the door behind her. I was standing in the hallway when it happened. I could not make out the words through the wall, but the tone carried perfectly, and it was not pleading. It was not begging. It was anger controlled and precise and unwavering. The voice of a woman who had spent 2 years being spoken about and decided and arranged and had finally chosen to speak for herself on her own terms. When she walked out 10 minutes later, her eyes were red, but her posture was perfect. Back straight, chin up, shoulders squared. She passed me without looking over. She did not need to. Derek found me one final time in the parking garage that evening. He was leaning against his car, arms crossed, wearing the easy smile of a man who believed he had already won. "She'll get bored of you," he said, glancing at his watch like the conversation was beneath his time. "She always does." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I opened my car door, sat down, started the engine, and pulled away without uttering a single word. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire drive home, not from fear, but from the exhausting effort of keeping every single thing I wanted to say locked behind my teeth. 2 days later, an inner office envelope arrived at my new desk on the south side. Inside was Claire's clutch, and tucked inside the clutch, folded into a careful square, was a piece of paper with 5 words in her handwriting. "I'm not losing this one." She was not talking about the clutch. I knew that. And for the first time in weeks, something tight behind my ribs quietly unclenched. 2 weeks went by. I did not see Claire. She did not call. She did not text. I did not reach out. The boundary Richard had drawn between us was clear and sharp, and I had no intention of crossing it. I buried myself in the South Side renovation, throwing every hour into concrete specs and load calculations, trying not to think about her, which meant I thought about her constantly during my morning commute. During every quiet lunch, I ate alone at my new desk. During every evening I spent in the apartment, sitting on the sofa where she had slept, staring at the cushion that still held, somewhere deep in its fabric, the faintest ghost of jasmine perfume. Then one Thursday evening, the doorbell rang. I was sitting in the living room with a book I had read the same paragraph of 4 times without absorbing a word. I opened the door and there she was. Claire, no makeup, hair loose around her shoulders, wearing an oversized hoodie that swallowed her frame and a pair of old jeans. She was holding a brown paper bag from the Thai place 3 blocks down the street. "I figured you eat alone most nights," she said. "I do too." We sat on the floor of the living room because my dining table was buried under structural drawings and project binders and an empty coffee mug I had not bothered to wash. She opened the takeout containers, pulled out 2 pairs of wooden chopsticks, and handed me one. We ate pad thai and green curry sitting cross-legged on the hardwood, the same hardwood where I had laying on a thin blanket the night she passed out on my sofa 3 feet away. She noticed. She looked down at the floor beneath her, then back at me. "Is this where you slept?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She went still for a long time after that, eating slowly, turning something over in her mind. Between bites of curry, she told me she had gone to her father, sat across from Richard Whitfield's desk, and told him everything, holding absolutely nothing back. About Derek, the possessiveness, the monitoring, the 2 years she had spent performing a relationship she never chose. About the night at the bar, what she was running from and what she was moving toward without fully understanding it yet. About me, Richard had listened. He had not interrupted. He had not dismissed her or redirected the conversation to business. He was not happy, not by a long measure, but he had listened, which was more than she expected and more than he had ever done before when it came to her personal life. Then she set her chopsticks down carefully on the edge of the container and looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her. Open and unguarded and slightly afraid, the way a person looks right before they hand you the one thing that could break them if you chose to use it. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I stopped eating that night at the bar," she said, choosing each word slowly. "I knew who you were." I stared at her. "Jordan mentioned you at a company event a few weeks before that night. He pointed you out across the room, said something about the new guy on his team who was too quiet for his own good. I noticed you later. I looked you up in the company directory. I found your photo. I read your project history. And I thought about you more than I should have." She paused. "I didn't go to that bar randomly, Nathan. Jordan had mentioned to someone in Derek's circle that your group was going out that Friday night. I went because I knew you would be there. I went because of you. You knew. I said I knew your name. I knew your face. I didn't plan to get drunk. I didn't plan for you to bring me to your apartment, but I planned to be in the same room as you. And I am not going to sit here on this floor and pretend that was some kind of accident. I sat there with chopsticks in my hand and cold noodles on my lap, looking at the woman who had just told me that the most chaotic night of my recent life had not been random at all. She had come looking for me. The reason she gave the world, drowning the end of Derek in cocktails, was true. But beneath it was a second truth she had carried silently for months. She wanted to be near me, and through a chain of events neither of us could have predicted or controlled, she had ended up unconscious on my sofa and I had ended up on the floor, and now here we were in the exact same room, sitting in the exact same spots with the truth finally on the table between us alongside the empty takeout containers. "If we do this," I said slowly, "your dad could fire me. You understand that?" She looked at me without blinking. "If he fires someone for being decent to his daughter, that says more about him than it does about you." I did not kiss her that night. We washed the dishes side by side at the narrow kitchen sink, shoulders closed but not quite touching, steam rising from the hot water, neither of us saying much. She left a little after 11. At the front door, she turned back and gave me a small, deliberate smile. "I left my clutch on your kitchen counter," she said on purpose. Then she walked down the stairs and I closed the door and stood there with my hand on the knob, not moving, just breathing, feeling something I had not felt since before the divorce. The quiet, terrifying possibility that my life might still hold a direction I had not planned for. The first month was quiet and careful and entirely ours. We kept everything private. Not because we were hiding, but because what was growing between us did not yet belong to anyone else. I cooked. Claire brought wine. She would arrive after work, slip off her shoes at the door, and curl into the corner of the sofa. That same secondhand sofa where she had slept as a stranger, laptop balanced on her knees, reviewing marketing reports while I spread structural drawings across the living room floor and worked on calculations with a pencil behind my ear. Slowly, without either of us naming it, that sofa became the center of everything. It was where she read in the quiet hours after dinner, where we watched old movies on Saturday nights with the lights off and the city glowing amber through the window, where she fell asleep against my shoulder on the evenings. She stayed too late, and neither of us wanted to be the one to say the night was over. She started leaving things at my apartment, one object at a time, each small enough to seem accidental, but placed with enough intention that I knew it was not. A toothbrush in the bathroom cup, a pair of soft slippers by the front door, a half-finished novel on the coffee table with a grocery receipt as a bookmark, a hair tie on the nightstand. Each item was a quiet declaration. I am choosing to be here. She never said it out loud. She did not need to. The slippers said it for her. I started to notice the way she inhabited my apartment. Not like a guest passing through, but like someone learning the geography of a place she intended to stay. She knew which cabinet held the mugs and which drawer stuck if you pulled it too fast. She knew the kitchen faucet would drip all night if you did not turn the handle all the way to the right. She knew the third floorboard from the bedroom door creaked if you stepped on its left side. She knew these things because she paid attention. And she paid attention because this place, this ordinary two-bedroom apartment with its creaky floors and its narrow kitchen and its secondhand sofa mattered to her in ways she had never experienced inside a penthouse. At 3 months, Richard invited me to lunch, just the two of us at a quiet steakhouse downtown. I walked through the front door completely convinced I was about to be fired. Instead, he ordered a steak, medium rare, and a glass of water, and he looked at me across the white tablecloth for a long time before speaking. Claire told me everything he said about Derek, about that night, about you. He went quiet long enough for the waiter to bring bread and disappear again. Then he said, "I don't like it." Another pause, heavier than the first. But I respect that you told me the truth when I asked. He did not say he accepted us. He did not offer his blessing or shake my hand or call me son. He said he respected the truth. And at that point in my life, standing inside a relationship that could cost me my career, that single sentence was enough. At 6 months, I completed the biggest project of my career, a 42-story residential tower on the Chicago lakefront. 2 years of engineering work made permanent in steel and glass and poured concrete. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Richard stood at the podium and spoke my name into the microphone, and 300 people in hard hats and business suits applauded. Claire was in the crowd, standing beside her father, and when the noise died down, she looked at me with an expression no one else in that crowd could have read, but I could. It said what she had been saying quietly since the night on the sofa, through a toothbrush and a pair of slippers and a clutch left deliberately on a kitchen counter. I see you. I choose you. I am not going anywhere. Derek made one final attempt. Around that time, he dug up the same hallway footage, the same context-free narrative, and sent it to Richard in an email recommending the company reconsider my employment. Richard forwarded the email to me the same afternoon with a single line in the body, handled, focus on the building. That was the moment I understood without any remaining doubt that Richard Whitfield had chosen where he stood. Not because he liked me, not because he approved of the relationship, but because he had weighed the evidence against the accusation and he had chosen the truth over the easier story. That was the most Richard Whitfield thing he could have done. And it was the first time I realized that his rigidity, the quality I had feared most about him, could also work in my favor. At 1 year, Claire moved in, not to her father's penthouse with the skyline view and the doorman and the marble kitchen island to my apartment, the 2-bedroom in Lincoln Park with the creaky floors and the kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people to pass each other without touching. She arrived on a Saturday morning in early autumn with 3 suitcases and the clutch. I stood in the doorway, watching her carry the last box up the stairs. And when she set it down in the living room, I said, "You're leaving a penthouse for this?" She picked up the clutch, walked to the narrow shelf beside the front door, placed it carefully on the wood, and straightened it with 2 fingers. "I'm not leaving anything," she said. "I'm arriving." The clutch stayed on that shelf. It was not lost. It was not forgotten in a conference room or delivered through interoffice mail with a secret note folded inside. It was placed there on purpose by a woman who had spent years holding everything tightly, guarding herself behind expensive walls and controlled smiles, and who had finally found a place ordinary enough and safe enough to set things down. And the sofa, that secondhand beige sofa she had collapsed onto as a complete stranger on a Friday night, too drunk to recall her own address, was the same sofa she curled up on every Sunday evening with her feet in my lap, reading a novel while I watched the city lights shift and settle through the window. Same frame, same worn cushions, same faint creak when you sat down too quickly. Same apartment, same city, same man sitting beside her. But everything else in the universe had shifted into a completely different arrangement. One morning, I was lying on my back under the kitchen sink, wrench in hand, fixing a slow leak that had been dripping for a week. Claire leaned against the counter and looked down at me. "You still fix things?" she said. I tightened the fitting and shrugged. "That's my job." She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "That's who you are. Sometimes I think about that night. I sit on this sofa, our sofa now, and I let myself travel back to the version of me who sat on its edge with his hands clasped together, staring at a stranger in a pale blue dress, watching her phone light up with a name that could have ended everything. Every instinct I had told me to walk away. This is not your problem, Reeves. In the morning, pretend it never happened, but I stayed long enough to put a bottle of water on the table. I stayed long enough to write a note that said she was safe. I stayed long enough to sleep on the floor of my own bedroom so that a woman I had never met could rest without fear. That small moment, the water, the 2 Advil, the 5 words on a torn piece of paper, that is what changed everything. Not because I am a particularly good person, but because sometimes life does not need you to do anything heroic. It just needs you to stay one more minute and let someone know they are not alone. She came into my life disguised as a stranger who needed somewhere safe. I gave her my sofa. She gave me back everything I did not know I had lost. If you have ever stayed when every instinct told you to leave, I want to hear about it. Tell me your story in the comments. And if this one made you feel something, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because I bring you a new story every single week. Have you ever helped a stranger only to realize that person changed your entire life? And if you were in my shoes that night, would you have brought her home or would you have left her at the